Hi, everyone. Today, I'd like to talk about my paper, Searching for the Non-Consequential, Dialectical Activities in HCI and the Limits of Computers. This has been a very hard paper for me to write because it challenges some of the fundamental assumptions we hold in our field. To start illustrating this idea, I want to ask you what this might be a proxy for a number of statements. For instance, when I say getting my kid into Harvard, what is this really a proxy for in terms of our human activities? In this case, we might say that getting one's kid into Harvard is a proxy for being a good parent. Likewise, when we say that someone is active on social media, this might be a proxy for being a good friend or a colleague. Finally, if one publishes 5 papers at HCI this year, we might say this is a proxy for being a good researcher. But I hope what you see as I'm going through this is that there's a certain degree of ridiculousness to this. It's not that a good researcher would never publish 5 HCI papers, but hardly do we think these things are equivalent. Generally speaking, there's something amiss in the equivalence we might draw between achieving an end and seeing and acting on the good of an activity. And the core idea of this talk and of my paper is to point to this limitation of thinking about the ends to be achieved and it being a replacement for actually seeing and acting on the good of a human activity. In particular, the key idea is that if we can somehow achieve an end, but without actually seeing and acting on the good of a human activity, whether that's producing papers, getting our kid into a school, or being active on social media, that we might have really missed the point of the actual activity, of being a good parent, of being a good friend, and being a good researcher. And this idea is often stated as the difference between consequentialism, which is the idea that actions are valued for the ends that they achieve, and dialectical activities, which is about intrinsically valuable human activities that are valued not only for the ends that may be achieved, but the good that we might come to see and live in our engagement in the activity. So for the rest of the talk, I'd like to walk you through 4 different points I'd like to make, which are made in more detail in my paper. The first point is that consequentialist thinking cannot explain intrinsically valuable human activities. The second point is that HCI as a field largely engages with consequentialist means-ends thinking, and as such is also subject to the limitations of consequentialism. The third point is that computers are consequentialists, means-ends machines, and as such, they also can never fully support or replace intrinsically valuable human activities. And that in turn leads us to the question, what is the role of HCI in supporting intrinsically valuable human activities? For ways of living a human life that are valued for more than just the outcomes to be produced, what is HCI's roles in supporting such human activities, and how might that look like? To get into this, I'll start by talking about the limitations of consequentialism as a way of thinking about the world. We're all consequentialists to some degree, and what consequentialism states is simply this idea that the value of our actions reside in the ends to be achieved. These ends can be tangible ends, like I want to have a task completed, or about a particular experience, such as engaging playfully. All of you, and myself included, of course, have had a consequentialist thought today. Whether that's getting out of bed, watching this talk, or working on some next milestone on a personal project. In all these cases, we can disagree about what ends are valuable and how to get there. But if we're thinking about means ends, we're thinking consequentially, and we're all consequentialists in that regard. And the core argument of my work, following the philosopher Talbot Brewer, is that there's a core limitation in this way of thinking. What about human activities whose value do not reside in the ends that may be produced or achieved? What might these activities look like, and how might we support them when it isn't just about the ends? To illustrate this limitation, consider as an example the idea of being a good parent. If you're a consequentialist, well, maybe you don't like my getting into Harvard measure, but you can think about other measures or outcomes that best captures the kind of child you wish to raise. However, there's a different way of thinking about what being a good parent is about, which you can think about as the non-consequentialist way of thinking about it, which is to see the good in honoring the already wholly present value of the child in the here and now than just the child's future traits and achievements. And the question we want to be thinking about in parenting and other important human activities is, what is the intrinsic good of the activity? What is the good in it, and how do we come to see it and act on it? To think about this question and its relevance to HCI, I used Halbert Brewer's concept of dialectical activities, which are human activities that are valued for their own sake. Examples of dialectical activities include parenting, relating to other human beings, making art or music, and conducting research. And the key idea here is not that such activities cannot produce an outcome, but that there's something intrinsically valuable about these activities that isn't simply captured in an outcome. What's interesting about dialectical activities is that we engage in them with an imperfect sense of their good and place in our lives. It is through our self-deepening engagement with the activity that the activity reveals its meaning to us. As we engage in it, we deepen our understanding of what's good about the activity and how to better act in pursuit of its ideals. For those of you who have engaged in research for quite some time, you might think about how your view of research and the good in research might have developed over time, not only as your skills have grown, but as you've come to see the value of research differently across your career. And the key question with dialectical activities is, how does a person come to see the good in an activity in which they're engaged and to act on that good? This is really important for intrinsically valuable activities whose value do not reside in ends. But this isn't a question that HCI is really well equipped to answer, because HCI is largely a consequentialist enterprise. For instance, Zimmerman states that the role of designers is precisely to produce novel integrations of HCI research to make a product that transforms the world from its current state to a preferred state. Where our focus in HCI, despite various expansions and reformulations, has largely been concerned with shaping the world to achieve desired ends. In my paper, I expose how common HCI research contributions are all consequentialist. For instance, HCI systems research largely focuses on discovering new technological means for reaching desired ends, whereas qualitative studies may focus on understanding which ends are desired or advocate for certain ends that have been neglected. What this analysis shows is that a lot of our work is thinking about ends. And while that is valuable in its own right, it does not give us a lot of clues about how we can support intrinsically valuable dialectical activities. For the rest of the talk, instead of talking about how we might support dialectical activities in HCI, I want to help us understand what about supporting dialectical activities in HCI is difficult. Why is our work so much about achieving an end and not about seeing and acting on the good of an activity? To answer this question, I examine the limitations of digital computers as we know them. That fundamentally, computers are input and output machines that reliably produce desired outcomes, and in particular, desired consequentialist outcomes. Computers are machines that do a good job of encoding consequentialist thinking. So if there's an output we're trying to produce, computers can help. But what if we're trying to support isn't just about the outcomes? And just as a consequentialist, production-oriented mindset cannot be the be-all and end-all of advancing human values rooted in dialectical activities, the claim I make in the paper is that neither can computers, which effectively encode consequentialist thinking. And the key point here is that if we overly focus on what computers can do, we're going to end up solving consequentialist problems, then advancing dialectical forms of engagement. In other words, we lose sight of a valuable way of leading a life, one that is imbued with human goodness and meaning. This is a real problem for HCI. If we are to care for these human activities and the intrinsic value of engaging in them, what are computers able to do in this space? And where might computers distort our understanding of the value of our very human activities? As an example, consider the question of ethical AI which people have framed as the challenge of encoding human situations into a computer so that they can produce the desired ethical decisions on our behalf. But the problem with this framing is that even if computers can encode situations and the decisions we wish to make in these situations, this isn't really ethical reasoning. And the reason that this isn't really ethical reasoning is that ethical reasoning, at its best, is a dialectical activity. It is an activity in which we continually reinterpret a situation in light of the good of ethical reasoning. That a situation isn't just something we understand once and are done with. It's how we come to see a situation, to think, actually, in this case, here's how we might think about it. And actually, what's really going on here is not that, but this. That we come to engage in ethical reasoning and to do it more fully. In other words, this isn't a task about encoding. Instead, this is a task about coming to see a situation differently, in light of what's good and right, in our dialectical engagement with ethical reasoning. This example helps to illustrate a broader distinction between my claim and those made by Lucy Suckman about the limitations of computers. Suckman's argument largely states that computers cannot understand a situation like humans can, which makes them imperfect consequentialist machines. My claim here is that computers cannot come to see a situation differently. That the problem isn't just that they're imperfect consequentialist machines, but that they are consequentialist machines. That these are machines whose consequentialist nature is all about producing an output, then engaging dialectically and continuing to reinterpret a situation. An important implication of this observation is to recognize the inherent misalignment between the values we care about and what technological solutions can provide. What I've been highlighting in this talk and go into more details on in the paper is that it is tempting to shift our values to align with what technology can do. But we all lose something when we let the problems we can solve with technology dictate how we live our lives. How might we instead stick with the values we care about and find ways to realize these values for ourselves and for others? It will require new ways of thinking and humbly accepting the limits of our understanding. In the paper, I begin to sketch out ways by which HCI can indirectly support dialectical activities and the challenges in supporting dialectical activities more broadly. I won't get into the details of these points here. Instead, I want to close by highlighting HCI's dual mandate to both harness technology's power and to protect and advance core human values. Clearly, this is a challenge where on one hand, we have consequentialist concerns, yet we also, on the other hand, wish to sustain the value of the dialectical activities we care about. We value system designs because we want to design solutions to problems that are out there in the world. And even though they're consequentialist problems, they're important. At the same time, we want to think critically about the intrinsic value of core human activities and how we can support them and sustain them. In the paper, I present a vision of HCI that does that, which I call computational ecosystems. The core idea is to place the consequentialist values we care about and the dialectical activities we care about into our thinking of the design of socio-technical systems. In an important way, the computational ecosystems framing emphasizes the importance of designing and studying socio-technical systems not only for the ends that it can achieve, but for the good that it can bring to light that we cannot bring to light with computational thinking alone. I'm happy to talk more about this, but I'm out of time, so thank you so much for watching this talk. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this important work with you. I hope it challenges the way you think about your system building and your critical thinking in a way that helps us to advance a vision of HCI that is feasible, sustainable, but also deeply human in the ways that I've described. Thank you so much, and I look forward to engaging with you further on this work.